Have you ever wondered how a shattered heart could choose to love the very hand that caused its ruin? Tragedy struck with a single gunshot, robbing her of the one she adored, yet she walked an aisle to stand by that bullet's orchestrator. Fear wove itself into devotion, and her quiet pleas for normalcy clashed with the unstoppable force of a twisted romance. Each forced smile camouflaged a deeper dread, turning her daily life into a silent cage. Could raw desperation truly lead someone down an aisle lined with red flags instead of roses? Welcome to True Crime Acts, where we look into the hidden truths behind some of the most chilling real-life events. Our mission is to uncover the stories that shock, educate, and spark change, reminding us that behind every headline is a victim, a family, and a ripple effect felt by an entire community. If you find this journey as important as we do, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to ensure you never miss another gripping exploration into the depths of human behavior. The tragic sequence begins with an abrupt act of violence no one saw coming. On a crisp night, Edua Martin Brown found herself ambushed outside a modest Arkansas home, helplessly watching her boyfriend Daniel Hill fall to gunfire. In that single moment, her world tipped into a realm of confusion and heartbreak that loved ones would question for years. Daniel, known among friends for his tender heart, had offered Edua a chance at a peaceful future. She'd recently distanced herself from Danny Maurice Brown Jr., an ex-partner linked to emotional turmoil. Tragically, Daniel's caring presence became the exact motive for those unwilling to relinquish their hold on Edua, prompting the fatal shot that stole his life. The shock of seeing Daniel collapse launched Edua into a haze of fear and grief, drawing her paradoxically toward the man behind the killing. No one in Edua's circle anticipated her next steps. Many assumed she would cooperate with authorities, seeking solace among friends. But in the weeks to follow, she stunned everyone by stepping into the orbit of Danny Maurice Brown Jr., the very individual implicated in Daniel Hill's murder. The choice felt like a betrayal of reason, leaving investigators and Daniel's mourning family perplexed by her sudden alignment. Meanwhile, as officers compiled testimony and examined surveillance footage, Edua remained trapped between an older allegiance to Danny and the memory of Daniel's compassion. This internal tug-of-war shaped her subsequent months, setting her on a path that baffled even her closest confidants. Could the formidable blend of trauma, loyalty, and desperation truly compel someone to trust the man who shattered her newfound hope? And what does it reveal about human fragility when heartbreak collides with fear? Before life took its cruel turn, Edua Martin Brown displayed a vibrancy that suggested a bright future. She had supportive relatives, close-knit friends, and an emerging aspiration to create a stable home environment. From an outsider's view, she seemed poised for a life of promise, especially once she started inviting neighbors over for music nights, showcasing her gentle warmth. However, her past included a tumultuous relationship with Danny Maurice Brown Jr., a partner reputed for flashes of anger. Tension simmered beneath the surface for a while until Edua chose to step away, believing she could leave that chapter behind. Yet because they'd shared so much, possibly children, perhaps finances, a lingering bond remained. In time, she met Daniel Hill, a caring soul who seemed to guide her towards serenity. Their early days were brimming with spontaneous laughs, small romantic gestures, and the sort of easy contentment that had her friends beaming at her change in demeanor. With Hill by her side, Edua felt she'd turned a decisive corner, away from chaos and toward lasting peace. But that calm was soon disrupted by someone unwilling to let her fully escape his grasp. When the bullet that ended Hill's life rang out, it not only destroyed Edua's sense of safety, it also dragged her back into the orbit of Danny Maurice Brown Jr., the very individual whose hold she intended to break. Amid her sorrow, Edua made a choice that defied every logical impulse, forging a relationship with the man suspected of orchestrating Daniel's death. Observers called it unimaginable, a bond that seemed to contradict basic survival instincts. How can a pursuit of love and reassurance blind someone to the looming danger behind a familiar face? And do we judge too hastily without fully grasping the emotional upheaval she endured beneath her outward smiles? Immediately after the devastating night, Edua Martin Brown wrestled with grief in a hospital waiting room. She had lost Daniel Hill to violence, and her own injuries, though not life-threatening, left her visibly shaken. Yet the phone in her hands buzzed incessantly with calls from Danny Maurice Brown Jr., the man law enforcement connected to the killing. Initially, Edua cooperated with authorities, her voice quivering as she recounted key facts. But as time passed, her statements grew uncertain, seemingly eroded by a deep undercurrent of competing emotions and fears. Friends who visited her wondered about her reluctance to speak openly. She'd occasionally pause mid-sentence, scanning the halls as though wary of being overheard. Some chalked up her disjointed communication to the shock of losing Daniel, yet others sensed something more, like she was guarding the suspect. In hushed conversations, a nurse mentioned how his presence, even if just through phone calls, permeated the recovery room. The detective assigned to the case tried to secure her testament of the night's event, but the clarity of her initial account faded beneath contradictory statements. Behind the scenes, investigators built their file, phone records, text messages, and suspicious patterns that tied Danny to the attacker. Yet without a firm endorsement from Edua, they faced a formidable challenge in bringing formal charges. Meanwhile, Daniel Hill's loved ones felt abandoned by her shifting allegiances, struggling to understand how a grieving partner could recast the details of what she'd witnessed. Could emotional blackmail, entangled bonds, and dread warp a person's viewpoint so extensively that they defend the very figure believed to have robbed them of a calm future? And how deeply might heartbreak root itself into a fearful alliance? Just 2 weeks after racing to the hospital, Edua Martin Brown blindsided those around her. She married Danny Maurice Brown Jr., the suspect in Daniel Hill's slaying. The ceremony was devoid of fanfare, no floral arch or supportive crowd. A courthouse clerk, half in disbelief, processed their paperwork as Edua stood still, appearing lost in her own thoughts. News of their wedding stunned friends and investigators alike. How could she exchange vows with a man tied to her boyfriend's murder? The union threatened to upend the entire investigation. Married partners could invoke spousal privilege, potentially shielding them from testifying against one another. Onlookers worried that the key to unraveling the case might soon be locked away by legal technicalities. Insiders talked of Danny's controlling aura. Edua, still recovering from her wounds, grappled with exhaustion and confusion, an easy target for psychological manipulation. Domestic abuse experts recognized the classic signals: feelings of isolation, emotional coercion, and pressure to unify in the face of scrutiny. Social media posts soon emerged from the newlyweds, capturing moments of forced cheer. Observers described her gaze as haunted, while Danny stood with a subtle sense of achievement. For many, the situation seemed nothing short of a betrayal to Daniel Hill's memory. It baffled investigators, who had previously seen her as a willing informant. Yet from the inside, the day-to-day reality of intimidation and fear might have outweighed every ounce of logic. Does society often overlook how complex factors, fear, money, children, or trauma, can overshadow the horror of a violent act until the victim feels less endangered by the suspect than by an unknown future? After the unexpected courthouse wedding, Edua Martin Brown and Danny Maurice Brown Jr. settled into what some perceived as a domestic routine. Although she was still physically healing, each morning found her making coffee or tidying rooms, while he floated about, monitoring her actions. Their daily life felt staged, like a fragile performance threatened by any hint of spontaneity. Children from both their past connections wound up in this blended household defined by secrecy. Some nights, a semblance of real family harmony emerged, quiet evenings watching cartoons together or cooking a simple dinner. Other times, tension crackled through the walls, muffled disagreements occasionally followed by forced apologies. A neighbor later disclosed how they often heard doors slam, then silence, as though both were afraid to speak another word. Edua's social media, once brimming with lighthearted photos, now featured sparse updates. Occasionally, she uploaded snapshots showing them smiling at community events, but omitted any reference to the heartbreak that still shadowed her. Investigators, meanwhile, labored tirelessly to assemble a prosecutable case. They cross-checked phone logs, noticed unusual money transfers, and interviewed acquaintances suspicious of Danny's involvement in Daniel Hill's death. Yet the crucial piece, Edua's direct confirmation, never came. she politely dismissed their inquiries, leaving the authorities unable to press charges with the force they needed. Beyond the veneer of a stable marriage, rumors circulated that Edua had resigned herself to this uneasy life, as if the risks of walking away seemed more daunting than staying put. When people close to her asked how she managed to reconcile daily existence with the loss of Daniel, she met them with a resigned expression. It was as though acknowledging the truth might tear down a fragile barrier keeping her functional. What prompts someone to maintain a life overshadowed by secrets, living off the remnants of a crime that robbed them of peace? And is it ever too late to seek an escape from the person who orchestrated their deepest sorrow? As law enforcement intensified their investigation into the murder of Daniel Hill, attention zeroed in on Danny Maurice Brown Jr. Rumors swirled that Danny had orchestrated Hill's killing to reclaim dominance over Edua Martin Brown, determined to eliminate any obstacles between them. Anonymous tips filtered in, whispers of hush payments and clandestine meetings with local gang affiliates. One eyewitness reported seeing Danny hand an envelope to a man later suspected of being the shooter, raising the stakes for investigators. Despite mounting circumstantial evidence, frequent cash withdrawals, overlapping call logs with known criminals, detectives faced a frustrating barrier: Edua. Her recent marriage to Danny triggered spousal privilege, effectively shielding their communications from court proceedings. Every attempt to engage her for a statement was met with polite refusals or cryptic responses. "I don't remember," she'd say, her gaze averted. Meanwhile, her friendships deteriorated. Some friends walked away, unable to watch her align with the man accused of orchestrating Daniel's death. Others tried reaching out, only to be met with missed calls or vague excuses. Neighbors noted Danny's growing control. Edua's car, once parked freely, now vanished for days. Her social media, once lively, fell silent. Behind closed doors, a detective pinned a sticky note to the evidence board. "If she doesn't talk, we need another angle." Investigators knew time was slipping away, and with Danny tightening his grip on Edua, the chances of unraveling the truth grew slimmer by the day. Could relentless determination and a slip-up from Danny expose the full extent of his crimes, or would loyalty and fear keep the truth buried forever? Beneath the facade of domestic normalcy, Edua Martin Brown teetered between fear and fleeting hope. While public appearances suggested a functioning household, those close to her sensed the unraveling beneath the surface. Edua's co-worker at a local retail store recalled her showing up with dark circles under her eyes. She'd smile, but it never reached her eyes, they said. There were signs. Locked doors that once swung open now stayed shut. Friends noticed Danny confiscating Edua's phone, allegedly checking for disloyalty. Her access to bank accounts dwindled. One afternoon, a concerned coworker spotted her scribbling emergency contact numbers and addresses of safe houses. Startled by approaching footsteps, Edua crumpled the paper and stuffed it into her purse. Conversations with close friends revealed Edua's internal battle. "If I leave, what if he finds me? What if it's worse?" she whispered. Her fear wasn't unfounded. Danny had allegedly warned her that betrayal wouldn't end well. Yet, despite the intimidation, she began making quiet preparations, gathering vital documents, stashing small amounts of cash, and planning potential escape routes. Children complicated the equation. Edua worried that fleeing would expose them to further danger. Protective orders seemed inadequate. What good was a piece of paper against a man who had allegedly ordered a killing? Still, with tension mounting at home, she knew the status quo was unsustainable. How long can someone balance the razor's edge between survival and liberation before the scales tip? And at what cost does hesitation come? The unraveling culminated on a seemingly ordinary afternoon that turned deadly. Edua Martin Brown had cautiously laid the groundwork for an escape, clothing packed in hidden bags, essential documents stored at a cousin's home, and a final call placed to a local shelter. But Danny, sensing something amiss, returned home unexpectedly. Neighbors later described hearing muffled yelling escalate into a full-blown argument. "It was like fireworks, but terrifying," one recounted. Windows rattled from slammed doors. Minutes stretched like hours until the sound no one wanted to hear split the air. Gunfire. Panic erupted. Someone dialed 911, voices trembling as they relayed the chaos. First responders found Edua gravely wounded on the living room floor. EMTs performed frantic CPR, but the severity of her injuries left little hope. As paramedics rushed her to the hospital, Danny fled in his vehicle, sparking an immediate manhunt. The chilling parallel wasn't lost on anyone. Years prior, Daniel Hill had been gunned down by Danny's alleged orders. Now, Edua herself lay silenced, her plans for freedom cut short by the very man she once thought she could escape. Could quicker intervention or greater awareness of the escalating danger have saved her? Or was the cycle of control and violence too deeply rooted to break? News of Edua Martin Brown's murder reverberated through the community, sparking outrage and sorrow. How had a woman trapped between fear and misplaced loyalty been allowed to fall through the cracks? Public outcry surged as the similarities to Daniel Hill's death resurfaced. Danny, once again at the center of tragedy, remained at large. She wanted out, a close friend tearfully explained during the vigil, but fear kept her stuck. At the memorial, photos showcased Edua's laughter, moments at birthday parties, weekend picnics, and time spent with her children. The contrast between those memories and the reality of her end was jarring. Law enforcement faced criticism for what many perceived as missed warning signs. Community leaders demanded reform, emphasizing how abusers often exploit legal loopholes to manipulate victims further. "We failed her," admitted one police spokesperson. "We should have found a way to protect her." The grief wasn't just local, it resonated nationwide as her story went viral, serving as both a cautionary tale and a somber reminder of the complexities of abusive relationships. How many more lives will be lost before society acknowledges the full depth of emotional entrapment and acts to prevent similar tragedies? In the wake of this harrowing ordeal, only memories and hard-earned lessons remain. 2 lives, Daniel Hill's and now Edua Martin Brown's, were claimed by the same manipulative force. Left behind are Edua's children, now cared for by relatives committed to shielding them from the harshness of the truth. But as they grow older, questions will inevitably arise. Advocacy groups have turned Edua's story into a beacon for domestic violence awareness. Her narrative is shared in seminars, her face appearing in campaigns aimed at dismantling the shame and fear that trap so many in toxic cycles. "This is more than one tragic event," said a local organizer. "It's about the thousands of voices silenced every year, yet beneath these efforts the heartbreak lingers. Could earlier intervention have spared her? Could someone have connected the dots faster?" The bittersweet truth is that Edua's final days were spent desperately clawing for freedom, a fight cut short by a moment's hesitation and a predator's final act of control. What must we do to ensure no other life is lost in the shadows of unchecked abuse? And will Edua's story be the spark that finally drives lasting change? Edua Martin Brown's journey was one marked by love, loss, and choices that seemed incomprehensible from the outside, but were steeped in fear and manipulation on the inside. Her story isn't just another headline. It's a chilling reminder of how abuse thrives in silence and how loyalty can become a dangerous trap. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Like, comment, and subscribe to True Crime Acts. Click the notification bell to stay informed, and more importantly, stay aware. Your voice could be the difference between tragedy and survival. Will Edua's story be the catalyst for change, or just another cautionary tale fading into forgotten headlines?